Are we live? Yep.
Wonderful.
Cool. Just wait for some people to gather. Cool. Yeah, we're live. So I'll just wait for some more people to gather. Mm-hmm. Tonight we're going to be talking about organic, as it has become somewhat of a meme of late. The whole organic as carnist thing. Now, I'm not saying if you eat organic, you're definitely carnist, but we're just going to go hash over some of the anti-organic arguments, and probably more leaning towards the non-vegan side as opposed to vegan side. If you are consuming organic and you know what's up with it, we're going to go through some of the arguments against some of the contentions people have with like the cancer risks of consuming GMO and pesticides. We're going to go through some studies. People that have been following this on my channel will know that I had a debate with Logan Blake a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to go through what we talked about there, and we're going to go through some of the comments I have received on my video that I just put out a few days ago last week. So it's going to be a good discussion, and I'm here with my good friend Bryn. Hey Bryn, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty wonderful.
Yeah. So you have been sort of looking into this a bit as well, haven't you, and done a bit of research?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to follow some of the counter arguments that people have been providing. A lot of it relies on not really understanding how we can do statistical analysis on these papers, or otherwise looking at rather fallacious arguments. So what we should do as people who are trying to approach this problem objectively is really make sure that we're applying the best methods for reviewing the research when we come to our conclusions. So the big thing that I've been doing a lot lately is just making sure that when we look at especially the epidemiological research on cancer, that we're not committing some fallacies that might crop up if we use like relative risk versus the absolute risk ratios, or if we're looking at non-significant findings that has been a common occurrence lately in the vegan sphere. So yeah, the big thing is like if we look at statistical significance, there's some pretty clear trends in organic, and it's not to the benefit of the organic argument.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people kind of scratch the surface and they don't really look really deeply into it. They just see it at kind of like surface level, and then they don't really look any further, and there's a lot more to it than that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to know what you found out. And for me, it's just like I've only just started looking at studies and being able to know how to interpret them and stuff. So I can understand how a lot of people do misinterpret data and just sort of jump to the read the conclusion or the conclusion of the study, and they don't really know how to interpret it, and they just take it as verbatim. Oh, okay, that's what that's the conclusion of the study, and they don't really sort of look into it any further. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, with conclusions, it's very frequent that the sort of language that is used in science doesn't sound conclusive, because they tend to use like a statistical significance or some way to approximate the true value. Like when we do science, there's no way that we can do an infinite measurement of the consumption of organic, and there's no way we can find the true value, as it's called in statistics, where it's like if we had like an omniscient being, the omniscient being would know exactly what the like impact of organic is. But what we can do is sort of say, this is approximately what it will look like, and we're confident to this level. And sometimes that language trips people up because people think, oh, the evidence is inconclusive, or they think the evidence leans in a way that it doesn't actually lean.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful when you just read conclusions. You also just should look at the data and actually understand what it's saying first.
So let's just get off the table, first of all, the ethical point, first and foremost, because that's the crux of it. That's the most important thing, right? In terms of if you're vegan, I mean, I think the ethical argument is probably the most important thing that you should be concerned with, just because if something was affecting humans in the way that a certain significant amount of harm was being if human health has been affected in such a way where it is kind of significant to a certain extent, and you said, okay, well, I'm going to accept a certain amount of human suffering, i.e., if there was like a human farm, or it was some kind of human holocaust where the shit or the manure or the byproducts from that industry were being put onto the plants that were being grown to produce your plant-based foods as a vegan. I don't think you would be comfortable with that, and I think you would be comfortable with a certain amount of like taken away from the health benefits of that food, if it was supporting a human holocaust. So you'd have to say, okay, well, if I'm not comfortable with that, why am I comfortable with it in the animal context? What's the moral difference between the two? What's the like name the trait, essentially? What's true about what is true of animals that if true of humans would justify the difference in treatment? And why is it okay for animals and it wouldn't be okay for humans, or something like or dogs, or any other kind of species that we're more concerned about?
Yeah, and I mean, just to be clear, I actually see somewhat alarmingly frequently people bringing up the issue in terms of just organic. It's a little bit complicated, because it's not that we're objecting to organic conceptually. It's that we're objecting to the specific part of organic, that is manure and blood meal and bone meal being used, because those are specifically byproducts of a animal holocaust. There are forms of organic, like veganic, that aren't unethical. Like, those are totally fine. The biggest issue that we have is that it is practicable and possible to remove organic from your lifestyle and return to like a conventional farm lifestyle, and that would reduce animal suffering. So there is a strong case against specifically the use of manure and of bone and blood meal.
Yeah. So basically, let's just lay out on the table the premises concerned with the overall, like the overall structure of the problem, and it'll be interesting to know which one of these premises people would disagree with when they come to the conclusion ultimately. I mean, so basically, buying organic foods causes an increase in demand for organic fertiliser. Would you say that's correct, Bryn? It actually creates more of a demand, because if you are either making a profit from the byproduct, so essentially the byproduct could be a commodity. Commodity is something which is sold for profit, or if you're not making a profit, but you're giving it away, and by doing that you don't have to pay a fee to get rid of the byproduct, then essentially you will be creating a more demand for that product, because essentially you're lowering your production costs, correct?
Yeah, so basically the idea is that right now in like conventional animal agriculture, the manure is what's called like an externality in economics, and it's basically a hidden cost, or a cost that isn't directly associated with the production, that you have to account for in your like net revenue. And so the issue is, in a lot of cases, they have to either dig basically pits for this manure on their farms, and they have to deal with that, or they have to ship it off, and both of those things cost money and they cost land. Now what they're doing is they're effectively, like you said, they're turning it into a source of revenue, or even if they were donating it away, it would still be a removal of that externality. So there is a increased profit margin just by the use of organic.
Yeah, so I don't think it'd be very hard for somebody to argue that that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, like even if they are not making revenue from the manure itself, they still are increasing their profit margin. That's why they do it. Like they aren't charitable beings. Like corporations and I mean private individuals, they try to raise as much profit as possible. So they aren't donating this manure out of charity to plant producers. It's that it does in some way increase their profit.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and let's be fair, like the label organic, what you're actually doing by when you're buying organic, that label is their profit. That the certified organic label is there so that they can make an extra profit, right? Because why would they put the label on it if not? They wouldn't. They're doing it to make more sales, you know. So, so that we know that the data shows that with at least 96% certainty that the fertilizers are coming from animal agriculture. We know that, right?
Yeah, I mean,
from the UK study from 2015-17, I can pull up the data.
Yeah, it's a whole host. It's a whole host of sources. So, a lot of the increases in it lately have been from byproducts of farmed fishing. So there's a lot of like fish meal that gets used in organic farming now, and I mean very frequently in the United States specifically, like you said, it's from animal agriculture that happens like adjacent. So it's farms that are right beside it effectively. There isn't like some huge like network of distribution for manure. It's just that we happen to be growing animals pretty much everywhere. So those byproducts are super easy to just basically move to the field over and apply it to them.
Yeah. And then, so, I mean, we can be almost certain that it's coming from that industry. Now, I mean, it was the case a few months ago where I just assumed, I feel like a lot of people would do this if you're vegan. I just assumed that if the label had certified organic and it had the vegan society symbol, I just assumed, oh, that's veganic then. It's got to come from, you know, like plant-based composts, you know, but that's not the case. That's not the case. And these plant-based products that are labeled as vegan, although they are 100% plant-based, they are funding the animal agriculture industries. And we know that most of the products coming from those industries are from factory farms. You know, like at least like 95% of those foods are coming from factory farming. So, and I don't feel that, you know, if you're vegan, I think that if you know that is the case, and you know that with conventional, because I mean you can buy veganic, but that's quite fringe, right? I mean, I think everyone should probably take the time to find out where they can buy veganic from. But if you know that you can almost be certain that organic is coming, the organic certified organic products are coming from those industries. And you know that with conventional, it's probably more like 20%. The ratio is about 4:1. So because they still use, you know, some manure in conventional as well, then faced with those two options, you are morally obliged, really, if it's possible and practicable to do so, to choose the one that's causing the least amount of harm, and that's the conventional option.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that or anything else you feel like I should cover there. That's pretty much in a nutshell why I think we should.
That is the big thing, is like effectively the way that organic works is you can go look at how, like, what the ratio of manure to synthetic fertilizer is in conventional farming, and we definitely don't dispute that there is manure in conventional farming. We would probably even argue that like that itself is a problem. The issue here is that there is, on like a practicable level, effectively a dichotomy. There isn't really to any significant level the ability for people to go out and buy fully vegan food, but we're not totally concerned about that. The issue here is specifically that for 99.9% of produce consumption, it's that it's either organic or conventional. And so the way that conventional and organic differ is effectively anything that would be a synthetic fertilizer, which is usually around like 60 to 80% of the fertilizer in farming is replaced effectively by manure or by fish meal or by bone meal or by blood meal.
Yeah. Here, I just want to share. This is, if I just share screen, if I just remember how to do it. Here we go. This is the, this is where we get the ratio of how much manure is, well, this is where I've got the ratio, how much manure is used as compared to synthetic fertilizers, and how much is actually left on the land as well. It's this chart right here.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see, like, for the Americas there, basically. So the green is just like shit left on the pasture. It's just gone to waste. And then you can see, yeah, gray is the synthetic, and then the manure applied to soils is the orange. So, and that's for conventional farming.
Yeah. So yeah, effectively all of those gray bars there, the argument would be that there is some makeup of fish meal, bone meal, blood meal, and manure. There might be some level of vegan organic fertilizer in there. But right now, as far as it stands, there's a growing market for that to just be animal byproducts, because effectively these animal agriculture producers have an incentive to make that as cheap as possible. So they make it highly competitive with the cost of synthetic fertilizer.
And let's just be clear, like, organic is becoming more desirable due to, you know, really, really good marketing techniques. And also I feel like the cost of organic is coming down.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. And people have this, they just have this preconceived notion that organic is good because it's natural. It's just more desirable. If you have a choice between organic and conventional, and they're the same price or near to the same price, people do tend to purchase the organic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the clever marketing, and people think that it's somehow better, or they think it's healthier, or it's better for the environment, or whatever the case may be. Without, you know, without really thinking about it, I just think it's, you know, it just is more desirable, I feel.
Yeah, I think that if we're going to talk about things in terms of like naturality, it's a whole can of worms that I don't think vegans want to open up. We already have that case presented against us very frequently by non-vegans, because at its root, veganism is not a natural diet. It's only been permissible recently due to changes in how we can supplement our diet.
Mm-hmm.
The argument from nature is not a strong one, nor does like it actually hold up when you actually go and evaluate how things work, but like on a biochemical basis. So, for example, the way that like organic pesticides are selected is that they have to come effectively from like a plant source or like some source in nature. And so an example of this is the chemical Rotenone. And Rotenone is like comparable to, say, the like analogy of glyphosate. But when you actually go and compare the effects of glyphosate on humans versus the effect of Rotenone on humans, Rotenone has this huge carcinogenic potential and has also been shown to be linked to things like Alzheimer's. Whereas glyphosate, the link is much less there, just because the mechanisms of action are just completely different. A lot of these like natural pesticides are in and of themselves highly destructive. So it's not that like their natural makes them better. It might be even the case that they're just far worse. And that's why, instead of appealing to nature, what we like to do in science is we look at, you know, a huge hierarchy of evidence, and we make a case whether or not this thing is better than the other thing.
Yeah, based on, and so like oh, go ahead.
And like yeah. So for like example now, like now Rotenone is no longer permissible to be used in the States, but it's a natural pesticide. It comes from plants. But glyphosate is still allowed because the evidence shows that glyphosate is less harmful for humans and less harmful for other species than Rotenone is. So like an appeal to nature is not a very strong case, and it's not one that vegans should be making.
Yeah, and just to actually, it's interesting you bring up the Rotenone point, because I've actually looked at because the LD50s between the two are very different, aren't they? Like, do you want to explain? Can you tell me what LD50 is? Because I've just Googled it, and like they are significantly different.
Yeah, so LD50 is kind of interesting. The concept of an LD50 is what is the minimum dose that if you gave it to a creature, that 50% of that population would die over a certain time scale. And in the case of this, it's a little bit convoluted because LD50s can be misleading when you're comparing between two distinct chemicals because you don't actually apply them at the same levels. It's just that,
right,
yes, like Rotenone can be a little bit more dangerous just on a pure consumptive level. But you would spray less of it onto fields than you would of, say, glyphosate. The issue is specifically what is the like efficacious dose for pesticide usage and how would that affect humans? And so the evidence that we have appears to point to the fact that if we were using it over glyphosate, that it would be more dangerous for humans and more dangerous for species that we're trying to protect our crops from, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to ask. So is Rotenone actually used anymore, or is that?
No, yeah, that's what I mean. So yeah. It's now no longer permissible to be used in the States. It has to be phased out now. There are a few countries that will continue to use it for the foreseeable future, but in the United States and Canada, at least, so North America, it's no longer permissible to use Rotenone now.
Okay. Now, with that being the case, I mean, I do want to go into a bit more detail about the glyphosate and everything like that because I've been looking into it as well. You probably have a lot more than I have, but I feel like it's all really new to me, like how to interpret the data and stuff. But I mean, in terms of the Roundup, the glyphosate, a lot of people are concerned about it, and it has been in the news recently because of the people think that there is a significant kind of cancer risk from consuming products that have used glyphosate. Now, this has been perpetuated in the media recently because of this case from this groundsman that just sued Monsanto for like a ridiculous amount of money. Like, was it something like 289 million or something? Because he got cancer. And let me just pull up the link. Actually, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Monsanto have actually been bought out now. They don't exist anymore. They've been bought out by Bayer.
Yeah, it's Bayer Monsanto now. Yeah,
oh,
okay, it was sort of a merger acquisition. Yeah, Monsanto is like their GMO like subset. They have a lot of businesses, so Monsanto was just like a worthy acquisition for them, and I think that they just go by Bayer Monsanto now. The general discussion here that comes up a lot is a lot of people just intrinsically hold that Monsanto is a bad company, so glyphosate must be bad. What I would like to present to vegans is that it is permissible to hold the two following propositions together and still be consistent in that Monsanto is a terrible company that has been dangerous for humanity, but glyphosate itself is not a dangerous chemical and it has been beneficial for humanity.
Okay, so we can get into that. This is the story right here. Jury orders Monsanto to pay 289 million to cancer patient in Roundup lawsuit. So this is from back in August. So a jury ordered chemical giant Monsanto to pay 289 million on Friday to school groundskeeper who got terminal cancer after using Roundup, one of the world's most popular weed killers. So this is the case. So basically, now that this case has gone through, it just sort of opens up the door to all the other cases, so that Monsanto could be probably sued for everything. But yeah, we'll get into it. So, I mean, Monsanto's case here was that there wasn't really any significant evidence to say that the glyphosate is a significant cancer risk. There was only like sort of like 3 studies or something, I think it was. I need to read into it a little bit further, but
on glyphosate specifically, there have been hundreds of studies. What is interesting is when you actually just go and do a meta-analysis. The meta-analysis, there's no significant cancer outcomes except in a specific type of cancer called non-Hodgkins lymphoma.
Yeah.
And it's only significant in the sense that the range in which it might affect you is between like a 1.0 to like a 1.6 times like relative risk.
Yeah.
Which is to some degree that is a statistically significant finding. However, there is still that overlap with the 1.0 at the low end.
So I've got the study right here that you're talking about.
Yeah. So this is the one of the most recent meta-analyses on the topic. And what they looked at was a series of epidemiological and RCT studies. And they can find specifically which types of cancers had a significant finding. And by significant, what we mean is that effectively, like a relative risk is a ratio between like your chance of getting it if you're exposed to it versus your chance of getting it if you're not exposed to it. And if there is an overlap in the range of like some confidence over 1. So for example, if you look there for Hodgkins lymphoma, the overlap occurs because it's 0.7 to 1.6. And so effectively what that means is we don't know if it helps protect against Hodgkin's lymphoma or if it might cause Hodgkin's lymphoma. We literally can't say. The only thing that we can say from the meta-analysis is that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is either neutral or bad. And so from this study, basically what they concluded, the jury at least, was that the glyphosate caused him to get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's a bit of an issue here, though, because there's already a background rate of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So that you already just have a chance of getting it just by living your life in other like lifestyle confounds. The only thing that organic changes is that glyphosate changes is that glyphosate might cause you to get it at a slightly higher rate. And so that's what that lawsuit came down to, is the jury decided that despite there not being any evidence for this, that he got it due to the fact that glyphosate like had some multiplicative factor on his already likelihood to get it. But there's no evidence that just by like drinking glyphosate or being around glyphosate or sticking your hand in glyphosate that you would get cancer to any appreciable level. The only studies that show this are effectively very high doses in vitro studies, which is basically where you deal with like a group of cells rather than a whole being.
Yeah. So in vitro studies, they would be sort of lower down on the evidence hierarchy as well, right?
They're basically the lowest on the evidence hierarchy. It's a step above opinion and intuition.
So let's talk about the evidence hierarchy actually, just in case people aren't familiar with what we're talking about, because we know what we're talking about, but some people might not know like what evidence is better than what evidence. So maybe we should go into that.
If you just go to Google Images real quickly and just Google evidence hierarchy, I think the second result image is a really good one.
Let's bring it up.
Yeah, it's that black and white one there.
This one?
Yeah, that one right there. Yeah. So basically, like all a mechanistic study is you go and look at effectively like if I take a cell and I apply glyphosate to it, these are the sort of like biochemical changes or the responses that happen to glyphosate, and those responses might be carcinogenic in nature. However, the issue with that is we aren't simply just like an array of cells. We're a complex like system of various types of microorganisms, our body, our various systems. And so in a full being, like an in vivo study, that might change. That might not be carcinogenic anymore, or it might not be carcinogenic to an appreciable level. So when we go up the evidence hierarchy, we start moving into what are called epidemiological studies. And that's the case report studies, the cross-sectional studies, the case control studies, and the cohort studies. And basically what they do is they look at what happens when we give someone glyphosate, like a whole human being glyphosate. And they look at it on like a population level. And so they see basically these populations with higher amounts of glyphosate in their diet or their farming practices, or if they're using it at home, these people are either more or less likely to get cancer. And the issue is once we move from mechanistic studies to epidemiological studies, the association between glyphosate and cancer disappears, which is why the IARC doesn't actually classify it as a definite or probable carcinogen. It's just a likely carcinogen because the mechanistic evidence is there, but we haven't seen any evidence on a population level.
Okay, let's bring up the IARC, is it the
IARC?
Yeah, let's bring up that. I've got it here somewhere. Just give me one sec. Yeah, it's this one right here. So this is is it class 2A likelihood?
Yeah.
It's the one. Yeah. Oh God, where is it gone?
If you just click on that thing that says table right there, like you scroll down a little bit and you just click table, it'll show you the. I scroll down a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, tables. Yeah. Yeah. So that one right there is the classifications.
Yes, it's down the bottom.
Yeah, and so if you scroll down to the glyphosate one, you'll see that basically what they said is that there is limited evidence of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And that's what we already saw from that meta-analysis, is that the evidence shows that it might be bad. The evidence definitely shows that it's not good, but the evidence also shows that it might be neutral. And so we just don't know what that value is. And then we also know just from like mechanistic in vitro studies that there is to some degree a level of carcinogenity there. But we don't know how that would translate to beings on average.
Yeah. And also another point I would raise as well, I mean, with the likelihood of causing cancer with glyphosate, is it true that there are other things that we already consume which are probably just as cancerous that we just take for granted? Like, for instance, caffeine. Like, we don't know, the jury's out on that one, like whether it causes cancer or not. I think I mean, you can Google this. There's like a comparative thing. I don't know how true it is, or whether it is. But let's just take glyphosate. Risk comparison. Sure, there is a breakdown somewhere of, like, if you compare it to like caffeine, and there's like different things. I don't know. I can't find it now.
Oh, you mean just the classification?
Yeah.
So
the
the category it's in includes things like working long hours and
shift work,
and caffeine and not going outside. There's a lot of things that are in that classification. An important thing about the IARC is they don't actually assess what is called a risk. So they don't tell you how risky that thing that you're doing is. All they tell you is that it's a hazard. And so what a hazard is there's evidence that it might cause it if you have like a ton of it. But they don't say like anything dose response dependent. They don't say anything on the certainty that you'll get something. It's just there is limited evidence that glyphosate would cause you to get cancer if you got enough of it.
Yeah, here we go. There's a few different things here you can see on this chart. But yeah, I do remember the shift work thing it's on par with that because of the circadian, just ruins your circadian rhythm or something. So it's on par with that. So should we just ban the police and the ambulance service then because it's a risk to human health?
Yeah, and so like this is why like the IARC is just one component of policy making. It's all they are doing is assessing those risks. They're not assessing to what degree should we stop doing this, or to what degree does this actually cause anything. All they're saying is, you know, there is evidence that it has carcinogenic potentiality, but what that potentiality actually translates to on a population level is hard to say. And that's when we would then go and appeal to like the meta-analysis. And the meta-analysis shows that on a population level, the relative risk of the only thing it's been shown to have an increase in non-Hodgkin lymphoma is a 1.3 relative risk.
Class 2A carcinogen. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it's on Wikipedia. Yeah, here we go. There's a list of them all. And you can see, oh, hairdresser and barber, big as an occupation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like these are all things that are within that same group.
Yeah.
But like, so for example, some of the things in here, if you went and looked up, you know, an analysis of what the actual like relative risk is, they would be much higher than glyphosate.
Oh wow, really? Okay.
Yeah. So it's just that specifically like this, like these things have the same level of evidence. So it's that all these things have mechanistic evidence. They don't have very good epidemiological evidence, and they don't have any random control trial evidence. That's the only thing that this says.
Okay.
But the actual like effect size, so the amount that it affects you, differs greatly in various things that are in this category. So like the shift work thing, if you went and looked at it, it might be like an astronomically low amount of extra cancer. It's just that, you know, on a mechanistic level, stress or shift work increases cancer. Yeah, but to what degree it does that is not something that the IARC even looks at.
Yeah. They just take the statistics across the board and just figure it out and put it out there. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like this is like the World Health Organization and the FAO have a broad spectrum of agencies that are responsible for certain sort of things that they look at. The IRC is the one that does, you know, an assessment of whether or not something is a risky behavior. But there are other groups that would be more concerned with whether or not like this thing is worth caring about, to what degree is this thing worth caring about, and you know, what actual effect does this have on you. And when we actually go and look at what those people say, their conclusions were there is no evidence that, yeah, you have the infographic up there, the 3 out of 4 thing. Yeah, there's no evidence that effectively there's anything worth caring about here. So like the IPCS there and the care assessment group both hold the view that glyphosate is simply not worth caring about, because the only cancer that there is any epidemiological evidence for is non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and that non-Hodgkin lymphoma had an it was not statistically significant. It had an overlap with having no benefit and no negative.
But Bryn, people still say, even after you present them with this evidence, right, we've just been through it as to why it's just not significantly important, they'll still say, oh, but it still causes cancer and I'm still going to consume organic anyway because I don't believe you. And I'm just going to carry on doing it because, you know, like after all the evidence that you presented, you know.
Yeah, I mean that would simply just be a special pleading fallacy. Like at that point, if your level of argumentation is, that's cool, I've had the evidence presented to me and I just don't want to believe it, what other things can you justify on that? And it would be practically anything. I mean, you can have the case presented to me that, you know, animals can feel pain, and I would simply say, well, I don't think they feel pain, so I'm going to keep eating animals. And that would be the same level of argumentation that we're working with here.
Yeah.
You could present to me the case, here's the evidence that if I, you know, shoot you with a gun, you're going to die. And I would say, well, you know, I don't actually think that's true. I don't believe in your evidence, or I haven't experienced that yet, so I'm not going to believe you. And then, you know, at that point, just shoot me.
This is something that, oh, hang on. Let's go back to that one. I believe in an invisible purple unicorns. That makes me feel good. It makes me feel good, Bryn. I'm going to carry on believing it, regardless of whatever you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the weird thing about this is it tends to be the case that people are making, some claim about glyphosate, and that claim is that it is bad for you. But when you actually look at the evidence, all of a sudden it's no longer that anyone's making a claim. It's just, they just intuitively don't want to do something about it. It's like, why did you even create that claim in the first place then?
I feel that it's post-rationalization. I feel that it's cognitive dissonance, where people just have that belief. They don't know why they came to that belief. It's just they just happen to believe it, and and for whatever reason they are invested in it so much that they just cannot go back. They can't backtrack. And it's the same with carnism. It's the same kind of line of reasoning, the kind of path that they follow is this kind of post-rationalization, which never works. You can't do that. You have to start from, okay, this is the truth, understand what the truth is, and then work from there. Is it right or is it wrong? If it is wrong, then you need to change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's validity versus soundness, right? Like their argument is valid that if glyphosate was bad for you, we shouldn't be consuming glyphosate. But then when you get to the soundness component, then you look at, okay, well, is glyphosate bad for you? They just simply don't have evidence for that. And so at that point, their entire conclusion is rejectable. It might be the case that glyphosate is bad for me. If they could provide evidence for that, I would argue against the usage of glyphosate. But that evidence simply just has not been presented. And the overwhelming opinion of the field, both on like a level of data and from expert opinion, is that glyphosate is not something that is harmful to us.
Yeah. And also you can wash your fruit and veg, and you can peel your fruit and veg and wash it if you're that concerned about it.
Yeah, this is actually one of the reasons why, just purely on a mechanistic level, that glyphosate is less of a problem on like a population level than it is on a mechanistic level. And so part of this is because effectively the way glyphosate is designed is so that it breaks down very quickly on plants. So there are residues of it, but those residues diminish very quickly. And then they are also able to be diminished by things like washing or cooking. And so the actual consumption of glyphosate is incredibly low in terms of actually looking on like a population level.
Yeah. And also let's just talk about a little bit more about GMO, right? So I am the Monsanto warrior princess now. That is the meme, apparently. So it's a huge meme because, again, like I said at the beginning of this discussion, like it is possible to hold the worldview that Monsanto is a bad company that has done dangerous things, and that some of the things that Monsanto has done are okay or maybe even beneficial for the world. And the GMOs are actually one of the strongest points on like something that Monsanto has done that is beneficial. There are some complicated legal arguments with GMOs and how they have treated farmers in the past. But on aggregate, there's a very compelling case for GMOs being benevolent for the world. Okay. So let's just talk about the scientific consensus, first of all. So here we go. I've got 3 organizations here that say that, because a lot of people think that GMO could be, it's just not safe for some reason. For what reason, I don't know. Would the composition of the food be harmful for humans to ingest? I'm not really sure what the argument is, or whether it's just the case that GMO usually has, pesticides like the Roundup, whether there's a link there. But here we go. Here's one organization, the International Council for Science, which is, you can see it's 111 national academies and 29 scientific unions. Currently available GM foods it deems it to be safe to eat as the conventional counterparts and suitable for human consumption.
Yep. Yeah, and this is actually an important part here, the bolded part. A lot of people, they appeal to basically the possibility of certain mutations or certain genetic modifications as being dangerous. And we don't actually argue against that. It's yeah, you can certainly genetically modify anything to be dangerous, or you might have some like crossover effect of a mutation that is dangerous. But GMOs on a whole, you can't simply hand wave them away because of this, because there is evidence that there are certain types of available GMOs that are beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The next one is from the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization agrees that the current varieties of GM foods are not likely to present risks for human health. So that's a public statement from the WHO. And then we've got the Society of Toxicology. The level of safety of current biotechnology derived foods to consumers appears to be equivalent to that of traditional food.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, absolutely. Like the genetic modifications that are occurring, they can be on like a nutritional level or like a safety level. In most cases, it's actually the opposite, that they're actually even more safe, or that they're more nutritious. And that's actually why we do GMOs, is to try to make them safer and more nutritious.
Yeah, I would have thought as well. I mean, I'm just putting this out there with GM foods. I don't see any reason why in the future they wouldn't engineer food to be able to resist pests. So maybe we wouldn't need to use as much pesticide.
That is actually what GMOs are for right now.
Okay, right.
So corn and soy GMOs are actually they're a pest resistance GMO, and the benefit to that is actually that you can use less pesticides. So I'll actually I'll send you a link right now on Discord about this. It's if you actually go into a meta-analysis, since we've introduced GMOs that are pest resistant, we've actually been able to reduce our pesticide usage significantly.
So the argument then that some pro-organic sophists put out there is that the use of pesticides, right, increases the amount of suffering and death because of the wildlife that consume that try and eat the crops, and also the bioaccumulation from the rodents or the insects going into the food chain, killing off larger animal, more sentient animals, like like owls, crows, this kind of thing. So really, I mean, if that is the case, then we should be promoting more GM foods.
Yeah, I mean, if you go
like ethically.
Yeah, if you look at the meta-analysis that I provided, what they found was that GMO crops actually have a 37% reduction in chemical pesticide usage.
Oh wow!
It's a huge amount.
Is this in the okay? You just sent it.
Yeah, I sent it on Discord. Yeah.
Let me just pull up the link. Okay. Oh yeah, I can share this right there. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, we could get into the nitty gritty if people wanted, but I think you can just skip down to the results and then just take them at face value. But effectively, the most common type of GMO out there is not a nutritional one; it's a pesticide one. And basically, what they found was in the results that on average, GMO technology caused the ability for farmers to reduce their pesticide usage by 37%.
But Bryn, who funds these studies, dude? Surely they're funded by Monsanto, dude. So therefore we could just dismiss this evidence.
Yeah, I maybe, but ultimately, like this was just a meta-analysis of 147 studies, and those 147 studies come from a variety of sources. Most of them are like most of these studies on GMOs are not constructed by Monsanto. There was like some cases of that, and I don't deny that. Like Monsanto has done some things that are dubious, but there are even meta-analysis that are being done now that when you go and include or disclude studies that were written or had in part been written by Monsanto, these trends still hold.
Here we go. I got the results here. The results are in, yeah. Reduced chemical pesticide by 37%. Increased crop yields by 22%. Okay. And increased farmer profits by 68%. So it looks good for the GMO side. I wasn't really big proponent of GMO foods before I talked to Logan Blake, but I'm actually coming around to the idea that it's probably more ethical and better all around.
Oh yeah, hugely. Like that's why we are developing them. It's basically like we can agree that there is limited evidence of pesticides being bad. Like we definitely use pesticides in a way that is human centric and speciesistic. And so anything that we could do to reduce suffering of animals would be benign. And so one of those things is these aren't actually pesticides. It's pest resistance. So what they do is they do things that basically cause certain types of organisms to not prefer those crops or to resist their ability to eat them. And so they stop eating them. But it is not in and of itself like a pesticide. Like it's not killing the creature. And so that allows us to reduce harm on basically every level.
Yeah. And let's just touch on that a little bit about that kind of whole argument, because a lot of objections that I hear is that, okay, so pesticides increase death and suffering. So therefore, because you consume a conventional food that causes more harm and suffering to wildlife, that effectively is as carnist as supporting the animal holocaust. What do you think about that? Are they one and the same thing? Are they in the same category? Do you feel? So it's the same, essentially the same kind of argument as that, you know, crop deaths, combines churn up, you know, like small rodents and insects and stuff for producing our food.
Yeah, they'd be on the same category, yes.
Yeah. So let's just be clear. One is unintentional deaths when you're producing food that we need to eat to survive. So like monocrops are going to cause a certain amount of death and suffering. And we accept this as vegans because we need to survive. The only other option is, you know, like permaculture or growing your own food, which is not really viable. Not everyone can do that, and it can't really be scaled up to feed the world. Or and then the other context is the other thing is, you know, an actual holocaust where you are paying to have animals stabbed to death purposefully because you want to consume their flesh and their byproducts.
Yeah.
So.
It's about like, what are we violating in each case? And in one case, it's we are going out of our way to violate the negative rights of the animal. And in the other case, it's simply like an externality of our existence.
Yeah. Which we would probably accept a certain amount of deaths in the human context if we needed to do that to produce food and there was no other way of doing it for everyone to be able to eat.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the what if humans were cannibalistic carnivore debate is a real fun one. Ultimately, yeah, it's just that at this point, like speaking strictly in the practical, we can operate as herbivorous beings, and so we shouldn't go out of our way to encroach upon the negative rights of animals.
Yeah.
Like there is a moral obligation there to not revoke their negative rights.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can always do more to improve the well-being of animals and to be more virtuous and to you know, to improve the rights of other living beings and stuff. But I would say at the very baseline, you should not support a holocaust of those animals. A holocaust is very different from accidental death, right? And improving you know, improving standards, improving welfare, that kind of stuff, giving them extra rights, positive rights, things like this. Those are extra things you can do to improve stuff. But ultimately, yeah, you need to step away from, you know, encroaching on the negative rights of a sentient being, which is like, you know, they have the right to not to be stabbed to death or exploited unjustifiably or raped or, you know, stuff like this.
Yeah, that's just simply the core of the vegan argument. That's why that starts to get into like the whole discussion over like what the vegan definition is and like where do we draw the line on practical and reasonable. There's always an argument that we should be more charitable individuals and that we should create well-being for animals, yes, But on a like moral obligatory standpoint, it's just we have the obligation as human beings to not encroach upon the negative rights of cows just for our pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was the the cancer. Going back to the cancer risk again. These two studies here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the study that Logan Blake brought up. This is going back to the thing where we were people are misinterpreting the studies and the conclusions and just saying that, okay, so if you eat organic food, you are lowering your cancer risk. Do you want to explain? So these are the two studies. Like these are like the two of the biggest studies, I think they are, aren't they? So this one right here from the United Kingdom, and then
so actually, so if we hold both of these studies to be good studies, and we can discuss a few of the methodological issues with some of the studies in a second, but basically what happens is we have two studies here that are competing. And the best way to resolve the issue of two studies that are competing that are at the same level of the evidence hierarchy is to simply combine them into a meta-analysis.
Okay.
And so what we can do is effectively, we can look at there's a couple ways we can go about this. The most science-based way to do this would be what's called a statistical significance test, and we can see which of the outcomes were statistically significant. And so in this case, the statistically significant findings were that in one study, there was a huge increase in breast cancer, or decrease in breast cancer from eating conventional. And in the other study, there was a huge decrease in non-Hodgkins lymphoma from eating organic. And so the issue is then once we add up those two increases and decreases, what actually ends up happening is that if you had a population of both of these studies and you had tested like all of these people together in one study, what would have happened is that there was a net decrease in cancers by eating conventional over organic.
Okay, so which one's which? This is a study right here. Was this the one that?
Yeah, so that's
the results said that the breast cancer risk was higher when consuming organic food.
Yeah, so that's that exactly. So this study, what it effectively showed, that was in a population of one second.
Somewhere down here somewhere. Was this like something like 68,000 or something?
Yeah, so basically in a population of 54,000 people that got cancers, there's 1,200 extra cancers from organic consumption.
Wait. Do you know where it says that? Where the population population size? Oh, is it this one? 53?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
Okay. There we go, right there. Sorry, just in case people think, oh, I don't believe you.
Yeah, so in a population of 54,000 cancers, there was 1,200 cancers that were basically you could ascribe them to being from organic consumption.
Where does it say that?
Basically, you get that from taking the rate of breast cancer. So if you look at breast cancer, there it has a relative risk of 1.09.
Right. Yeah.
And the confidence interval on that is 1.02 to 1.15. And so what you can do, you can multiply that by the rate of like cancers that were found, or you can basically go and find what the incidence of breast cancers were due to organic. And what you would find is that there was 1,200 extra cases of breast cancer from eating organic.
Right. Okay. So you take the 1.9. No, sorry. The risk ratio of 1.9, and you times that by.
Yeah, so if you go like deeper into the study, what you can do is you can go find what the actual like rate of incidence of breast cancer is in like the population without organic, and then you multiply that by 1.09 effectively.
Oh, okay. So you get
and that 1.09 will get you basically there was 1,200 extra cases of breast cancer.
So you find out the number of cases of breast cancer and you times that by 1.09.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Well, we don't need to do that now, but people can do that for themselves. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So It specifically came out to be that there was 18,691 breast cancers. And so if you multiply that by 1.09, you get some number, and then you subtract 18,691 from that number. And what you'll find is that there was 1,700 additional breast cancers. And then you can subtract some of the other findings from that study. And basically the net value of this study was that in a population of 54,000 cancers, 1,200 of them were from organic.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's complex because there's also just there in this study it also shows a reduction from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So there is some group of the population that benefits from it. It's just on a whole, if we took this study and we applied it to the population of say the UK, there would be some huge increase in cancers, specifically because the rate of breast cancer is so much higher than the rate of non-Hodgkin lymphoma.
Yeah, so breast cancer is more prevalent, isn't it, than non-Hodgkin's lymphoma?
Oh yeah, I mean significantly so. In this study, out of the 54,000 cases of cancer, 19,000 of them were breast cancer, and only 2,000 were non-Hodgkin lymphoma.
Okay, so it's a lot less. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and the other thing there too that's important to note is if we were to take this up the entire chain of epidemiology, what we could also go look at is the rates of recovery and the rates of death from these diseases. And what you'll find is that breast cancer also has a higher rate of mortality. So if you're increasing your rate of breast cancer in a significantly larger way than non-Hodgkin lymphoma, there's a even greater difference in the rate of mortality that occurs because you can recover from non-Hodgkin lymphoma a lot easier than you can from breast cancers.
Yeah, because that's the thing that people kind of miss is the rate at which you may get the disease, but and then also the mortality rate as well. Like there's going to be a ratio there as well. So, like skin cancer is a good example. Like a lot of people may get it, but they probably won't die from it. It's easily treatable. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of forms of skin cancers, and it's not great to have forms of skin cancers, but yeah, they're not something that you're going to die from very frequently. And non-Hodgkin lymphoma is one of those things where it has a huge recovery rate. And it's also just like relatively rare comparatively to like breast cancers. Like it happened like basically 1/10 of the rate. And so yes, like this increased the rate of non-Hodgkin lymphoma in this population, but it also like there's a significant decrease in breast cancers from eating conventional. And so what happens is if we do what we're doing here with this study and we go and apply it to the other study, the one in JAMA, what you'll effectively find. Yeah, so just hop over to the other study real quick.
Where is it? Yeah, this one.
Yeah, so if you go look at this study, we can apply the same math that we were just applying. And in this population, what happened is that there was a decrease of 234 cancers due to the consumption of organic.
Okay, so is it 68,946?
French adults, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the population. And then, so we go down to the results. Oh, yeah, so the results right here. So,
yeah. So basically, what we would do then in this case is we would be able to take the outcomes from the last study, which was that in a population of 600,000 people, there was an extra 1,200 case or a decrease in 1,200 cases of cancer. And then we would look at this study and we'd say in a population of 70,000 people, there was an extra 235 cases of cancer. And what we would do is we'd add those together and we'd say, realistically speaking, if you had a population of 700,000 people, the outcome would be that there would be 1,000 less cancers, or in this case, 1,000 extra cancers from eating organic.
Right.
Because like this study does show that like in this population, there was an increase in cancers from eating conventional. However, when you look at when you combine the two into a meta-analysis, it ends up being that to a really significant degree, there would be less cancer if we just ate conventional.
Whoa. And what do you think causes that? Like, I mean, the data shows that, but we don't know like mechanistically what's happening to cause that.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a whole host of things. Like, if we want to start getting into the nitty-gritty about these studies, the second study here, the one with the 70,000 patients, is actually incredibly dubious. They did what appears to be some sort of what's called a p-hacking. And basically what a p-hacking is you start with a data set and you start with like an outcome that you want to see in mind. And what you can do is you can actually apply algorithms that will figure out ways to chop up the data in such a way that you will find this. And so what they did specifically is they effectively excluded people that started with a healthy diet or that had healthy lifestyles. And what ended up happening is it's only in the case that you were someone who was having an unhealthy diet and then you added organic produce to that diet that you had a lower case of cancer. So it's like basically what they found was if you're eating a bunch of like potato chips or like conventionally produced processed goods, and then you add like an organic apple to it, they had less cancer.
Okay.
And that's all this study. That's all this study says. Because
Okay.
that's how they hacked the data. This study actually had multiple comments submitted to it. The study only came out about a month ago.
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, you can read the comments down below. Yeah, I can.
Since that time, multiple other researchers in the field have come out and said that this is not actually a good way to chop up this data because you ignored certain quartiles that if you had included them would not have found these results.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally only when you chop up the data in such a way that the only people you're analyzing were people with bad diets that this cancer reduction actually occurs.
Okay, so if they had a bad diet and then they added some organic to it, then
yeah, that's
effectively the cancer issues would come from. Okay,
that's effectively what this study shows. Yeah,
yeah,
and that's one of the main contentions against this study currently.
Okay, so not a good study design then.
No, it's really not. And what's interesting about the other study is they don't include those types of errors. It's a much larger study, so it's much closer. Like basically, the more you sample a population, the more likely you are to like approach what the actual value is.
Yeah,
you're more likely to actually get like a value that is closer to the mean that you would actually find if you studied this an infinitely long amount of time. And so looking at a study that has like 600,000 people versus 70,000 people is much better on like a study design standpoint. And then what's interesting is even if we can take them both to be equal, if we look at it in terms of statistical significance and we create a meta-analysis, it still is the case that eating conventional is healthier for you than organic in terms of cancer.
Okay, so in the first study as well, wasn't it like a longitudinal study as well in terms of the amount of years that they followed up from as well? I think it was something like 9 years or something. I can't remember. It says that.
Yeah. So they had 5, 7, and 9 year outcomes.
That's right. Yeah.
In those surveys, it was stronger. Whereas this French cohort was 3 to 5. So it's a much lower finding.
Yeah. So yeah, that just goes to show like all the different things that you would need to look at when evaluating a study, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, you just can't just take it from face value and just read the conclusion and think, oh, well, just take that as given then. You have to, there's lots of different things you need to bear in mind when making your considerations.
Yeah.
Cool. What was the other thing I wanted to ask you about? Oh yeah, the environmental kind of the environmental arguments now. Organic reduces greenhouse gas emissions. What do you think about this one?
I mean, it might. The data on here is relatively inconclusive. If you wanted to make the argument that it does, you would need that data, right? And the fact of the matter is that data simply doesn't exist. There's no conclusive evidence. What's really interesting about the data, though, is there's a lot of various spurious decisions that are made in the analysis. And so one of the things that they do is they look at it in terms of a per acre of organic food. And one of the issues here is calorie density changes based on the crop quite frequently. And moreover, organic farming practices require a certain level of density that is different from conventional. So the amount of calories produced on an acre of organic is different from the amount of calories produced on an acre of conventional. And so what would happen is if you're only looking at it spatially rather than in terms of nutrition, you might be able to find that, like, yes, it produces less greenhouse gases per acre. But if you look at it on terms of the amount of, like, say, soybeans that you produce, then that wouldn't actually hold up. It might be the fact that, like, one organic soybean had more greenhouse gas emissions released to produce it than one conventional soybean. And there's just no data on that.
Okay. So, I mean, some people don't believe this is true, though. Some people that I've spoken to have said, look, it's not true. Like, to produce the amount of they'll say that the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced per acre of land is actually less than conventional. I don't know where they're getting this data from. They don't actually give me any evidence, but yeah, they'll say, oh, because of small holdings, because it's not like a mainstream commercially produced product, is actually a lot less because of crop rotation and things like this. I mean, I would say that on the balance of evidence, that is not the case. And
yeah, so the most recent meta-analysis, which unfortunately is only from 2009, so maybe this has changed in the past 9 years, is that if you go and look at it on the basis of actually looking at it in terms of like a biomass produced or the amount of calories produced, they couldn't actually show any amount of greenhouse gas difference between conventional and organic. They basically ended up being the same, and it might have actually leaned, in fact, the opposite, that there might have been more emissions.
yeah,
It's only when you take in, like, it's only when you slice it up based on production area. But production area, as we've already like discussed, is a really bad metric because less plants are grown per acre in organic than there are in conventional.
yeah, I don't know what that argument is then, because surely it will take more land if they're using less pesticides and they can't use GMO, and therefore it wouldn't be as efficient. Surely they would have to use more land.
Yep.
Same kind of yield. But they're saying, some people that I'm speaking to are saying, no, that's not the case. I just can't get my head around it. Like, I don't understand what they're saying then in that case. Like, does that mean what, they are still producing the same yield per acre without pesticides? Can that be possible?
Yeah, so yeah, it's literally only per acre that you can get these metrics. So it's like, so basically if you go look at it on a land usage perspective and you say basically what are the amount of greenhouse gases I produce per acre, the ratio is between 0.47 and 0.69. And so what they're saying is it's basically it's around twice to like 1.3 times as efficient to do organic over conventional if we just look at it on a per land usage. But what's interesting is when you look at it nutritionally, and like, so nutritionally is super important because that would actually justify your claims in terms of feeding people rather than just using up land. When you just convert to land, the interval actually becomes 0.75 to 1.15. So we don't actually know whether or not it is better, the same, or worse to use organic. I'll link you the meta-analysis I'm talking about right now just on Discord real quick so you can follow along and we can actually scroll down to the table I'm talking about real quick.
Yeah, please do, and I'll post it.
So okay. I just threw it at you in Discord.
Oh wow, it's loading.
Like it might be the case that organic is better. It's just certainly the case that we don't have enough evidence yet. So it's not something that either camp can argue.
Okay, meta-analysis of differences in environmental impacts between organic and conventional. Okay.
Yeah, so if you can just scroll down to page 10 in there, and then I think yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm on page. This is page 10.
Yeah, I think if you just bring it up on stream for the people.
Is it not streaming?
I don't see it on screen share right now, but maybe I got something wrong. I don't know if people in the chat can see it, maybe, but I just want to
let's try again. Let's try sharing again.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear so that people can understand where I'm getting these numbers from.
Okay, it's presenting to everyone. I think everyone can see it in the chat. Can you see this? Yes or no? Can you see I am sharing? I'm fairly confident that I'm sharing. If not, then nobody has seen everything that I've been sharing thus far. No? You can't see what I'm sharing? Well, shit. That means that everything that I've been sharing tonight has... Oh, shit. What? Oh, that's annoying. Okay. Okay, I'm sharing on Google Hangouts. Have I not been sharing any of the material that I've been sharing then tonight? I mean, you've been seeing it on your screen, Bryn, on Hangouts?
I've been seeing it on Hangouts, and then it's just been recently that it hasn't been showing. According to the chat, it's only the last 5 minutes or so.
Right, okay. Let's stop and try again. That's annoying. Okay. Okay, how about now? Is that sharing? Can you see that?
I can see it on my end. Yeah, they can see it now.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, so if they look at table 6 here, the first line there is on a per acre basis, so like it's per hectare, and basically the number at the far right is the important thing that we're talking about here. That interval is a ratio, and so it's the ratio of organic and conventional greenhouse gases. So it's organic greenhouse gases produced for a crop over the conventional greenhouse gases per crop. So if it's lower, that's what you want in terms of what we're talking about here. And so if you look at it on a per hectare basis, it's about anywhere from twice to like 1.3 times as efficient to do organic. The issue, again, as like we've already described like a number of times now, is when you actually talk about this nutritionally, so in terms of like feeding a population, what ends up happening is that benefit goes away. We don't actually know whether it's beneficial. We don't know if it's negative, and we don't know if it's neutral, because the interval in which the real number exists, so the number that would happen if we like measured this infinitely, ends up being anywhere from 0.6 to like 1.13 in terms of, I think, yeah, they use a 95% confidence here. So we're 95% confident that basically it's anywhere from negative to beneficial to neutral, and we can't say for sure.
Okay. But again, Bryn, some people will say that, you present the evidence, but they will still believe that it's better for the organic is better for the environment. They're still going to carry on eating it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Still going to keep doing it. No matter what you say.
What's actually kind of interesting about these statistics too is these actually just looked at the production costs of organic versus conventional farming. So they looked at things like spreading and transportation of the products and the spreading of fertilizer. They didn't actually look at sort of secondary knock-on effects. And these are basically effects that would, if we went with entirely organic, what sort of things would happen secondarily? And one of the things that would happen is if we went entirely organic is we'd be producing more cows and we'd be needing more manure. And manure is a much more greenhouse gas ineffective method than synthetic fertilizers in terms of production, because the methane release from cows is much higher than the amount of greenhouse gases produced by synthetic production. Mm-hmm. So there's this sort of knock-on effect where the relative efficiency here goes away the more you scale this up.
Yeah, so these are the considerations here when looking at studies which say that organic is better for the environment. You need to factor in for the increased economic demand of cattle dairy industry when from manure, like the increased methane that would cause when calculating CO2 equivalent emissions. Because a lot of people think a lot of the studies that you will look at, they may not account for that, like the background noise from the methane, the CO2 that it took to produce the manure in the first place. Like a manure doesn't actually just appear out of nowhere. It's it's part of a process that is very destructive to the environment and to the ozone layer and for climate change and all this kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, so and there's a multitude of what are called like life cycle assessments that have gone into this study here. So I think that they specifically were looking at like 5 studies that looked at it in terms of land usage, and then 2 studies that looked at it in terms of production. And ultimately it's those 2 studies that looked at in terms of production that are super important here.
Production, yeah. I have a graph right here, which is based on a kind of like a meta-analysis as well. Are you familiar with this?
Yep. Yeah, I know what study this is from.
So it's from this study right here. So how do you interpret this? So this is the study that it's from. Comparative analysis of environmental impacts of agricultural production systems, agricultural input, efficiency, and food choice. And so this is the graph from it. So just like highlighted the land use there in the red.
Yeah. So this is actually a really cool chart to actually explain what I've been talking about with statistical significance all night. Basically, each of these bars that is colored in is what is called like a statistically significant finding. So it's a finding that doesn't have overlap between worse and better.
Yeah, because there's grayed out ones and there's colored ones, right?
Yeah, and so the grayed out ones are basically ones where, from a scientific perspective, we can't say one way or the other. The colored in ones here are like ones that we can say definitely we know that if we measure this infinitely, there would be a case for saying organic is worse. And so what's interesting about this is the only sort of data that we've seen from 742 agricultural studies is that fruits are the only case where the organic methods are better for greenhouse gas emissions. Everything else, there just is no data out there to support that claim.
Okay, wow. Okay, so
and in terms of land use, it's overwhelmingly the case that organic methods are worse. It's true for every single type of food production.
Well, I mean, also you need to factor in that this is accounting for animal agriculture as well, right? Organic meat and dairy and stuff like this.
They looked at it. So like even cases of like organic meat and organic dairy, it's like those are still also just inefficient. But what's interesting, actually, we can bring this up just as like a side point. We don't have to stick on this too long. We can talk about it later if you want, but organic plant farming doesn't actually require the manure or the blood meal or the bone meal to come from organic sources either.
Interesting, yeah. It can come from. They can be fed GMO food.
They themselves, they can be fed GMO foods, and in fact, there are studies showing that when we go and look at organic crops, the manure that is being spread onto them comes from cows that have higher levels of pesticides and heavy materials and other things that are unsafe for human consumption in them. So like the fact of the matter is in terms of like profitability, the most profitable model for them would be to have conventionally raised cows that are producing manure for organic plants. And that in there is a problem for people that want to be organic Puritans, because they wouldn't even be receiving purely organic crops. They would be receiving crops that have high levels of what they appear to think are dangerous chemicals.
They would probably say, well, that might not transcribe or come into the food, though. That it doesn't matter. Like what the animals are ingesting, I'm not going to ingest. That might be an argument. Just putting it out there.
I Yeah, but that's not the view of the actual organic certifiers board. And in fact, the USDA outlines, and in a study that I can send to you right now, that there is a warning that should be given to people who are consuming organic, that the inputs to organic farming come from conventional sources, and that there are high levels of heavy metals in that manure. They like readily admit it. The USDA is open about this.
And also the amount of antibiotics used.
Yep.
That could be transferred into the soil as well.
Yeah,
antibiotic resistance is going to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Surely, I mean, no, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be a thing. What's this? Guide for organic. Okay, crop producers.
Yeah, so if you just like Control F heavy metal, you'll find where they specifically outline.
Oh. Heavy metal.
Maybe make sure that you're clicked inside the PDF. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so they specifically outline that, yeah, they might actually be like within animal manures. They haven't yet. Okay. They haven't yet regulated against this. So it's the fact that like the USDA is openly asserting that there might be issues with manure.
Wow. Even more ammunition to say that, well, we should be supporting GMO if you care about your health. Yeah. If you care about cancer risk, if you care about ethics, and you can't find veganic, because let's be clear, I think you should try and find veganic if you can, if it's possible and practicable. But if you can't, then GMOs all the way. Why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. Is there anything else that you want to bring up in terms of the health arguments, the environmental arguments, the objections, I should say, against conventional food that we haven't gone over so far?
Yeah, so one thing that we can go over real quickly is the actual nutrient quality of organic.
Yes, this is another thing. Actually, I've got it in my presentation somewhere. Let me just... the fact that people think that it's more nutritious somehow than traditional food, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the objection that people have. Where are we? I did have some statements on that, but yeah, go ahead if you have anything to say on that. I'll find the relevant slides as you're going along.
Yeah, actually, so just a second, Foot Soldier is talking about something, and I think I'll address this nuance. Yeah, it's true that the USDA entry-level guidelines suck, and that's what that source specifically is pointing to, is that basically the minimum bar for organic is that the plant itself has to be grown in an organic way, and they're admitting that the conventional manure is allowed, but certification agencies that actually require organic manure are not yet present, and not present in an appreciable manner, and not present in a way that the consumer can readily see whether or not there is they're not sure whether or not, as a consumer, the manure was in any way organic.
No, they don't regulate for that. They don't have to stipulate that. And also, I mean, if they did have to, if the certification did have to include that, surely that's going to really reduce their scope for selling organic, because it's going to be because organic people that are basically, okay, so you're going to have to pay more for the organic meat in the first place, and there's going to have to be a huge demand for that to get the shit from that industry for the organically produced plant-based products or fruits and vegetables or whatever. Like that, I don't see how that could be viable.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be clear, like the organic industry is a really cleverly marketed industry, and it's to the point where, like,
the convolution of certification boards makes this problem really difficult to approach.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the fact that there is not even a good definition of what constitutes organic makes it a difficult question. The only thing that we can look at is what are the actual effects of conventional versus organic on like a broad spectrum. We can always appeal to like some form of organic that hits every niche, but those niches are not well defined yet, and ultimately are not things that the consumer can readily find available. They have to basically just go into buying organic blindly right now. And when we look at large scale meta-analyses, what we find is that going in blindly confers negative outcomes on health. It confers negative outcomes in terms of land usage. It confers negative outcomes in terms of eutrophication. And it's unsure whether or not it would be negative for the environment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
So basically, all the evidence point towards, okay, the jury is out whether it's better for the environment or not. Nobody really knows. As we're going to touch on next, there's not really any evidence to say that it's any more nutritious than traditional food. There's all the evidence pointing towards the fact that it's that or conventional or GMO and certainly veganic is more ethical, or is ethical compared to buying organic. And also, there's no evidence to say that buying conventional food is really going to cause any more cancer. The jury's out on that as well. So, is there anything redeeming about organic whatsoever?
Yes. So there might be, and it's like it's sort of these like really niche definitions that might actually confer a benefit. So there's all these like sort of mechanistic things that we can appeal to. Like, so for example, things like veganic, they might be better in the long run because they can go and look at all the evidence, and they can sort of appeal to all these things that we know to be bad, and we can say, okay, well, we don't want those. And so like one of those things was the whole discussion with Rotenone. And so like Rotenone, it used to be okay to grow on like an organic level until we discovered that it wasn't beneficial for human health. So now we're phasing it out in North America. So that's one example of where like over time we could adjust organic to be better for human consumption. And that's the sort of like this niche marginal case that like proponents of organic will appeal to, is that, yeah, you can just keep on iterating over organic. And I wouldn't actually disagree with that. There is probably a really good case for saying that certain things should be cut out of production conventionally and that we should switch to certain other things. But right now, on aggregate, the consumption of organic is not beneficial and possibly not ethical.
Yeah. So organic is, a lot of people think organic is safer. It might be, more nutritionally dense somehow. Consumers, here we go. This is the FSA response. The Food Standards Agency is the UK. I don't know what the UK, the US equivalent of the FSA is. I guess it's the USDA, right? Consumers may also choose to buy organic food because they believe that it is safer and more nutritious than other food. However, the balance of current evidence does not support this view.
Yeah, that's basically the view that is held, is that like on aggregate, there is no reason to suggest that organic is healthier in terms of a for each calorie you're getting a certain amount of nutrients. It might be the case that with the sort of like niche definitions that we could create some form of organic that would be more nutritious, but the evidence just simply isn't there yet.
And I don't know about you, Bryn, but I am an evidence-based person. I base my decisions on evidence rather than hearsay and speculation and feelings. So yeah.
It's so like one of the things that they would appeal to is all this like this small mechanistic evidence. And you can certainly just build a system up out of that. And at that point, what I would say is, yeah, sure, we can go and construct like random control trials that will show that sort of niche definition to work well. And I would love for that to happen because, as we've already described, like things that are more ethical in terms of crop deaths are more beneficial. Things that lower cancer rates are more beneficial. So if we have this like basic evidence that we can do that, then we should actually create those systems. It's just, as it currently stands, on average, those systems don't actually exist and are not practicable for the consumer to go out and get.
Yeah, and also even if let's just say for whatever reason, the non-organic food was less nutritious, right?
Hmm.
Was less nutritious for us on aggregate. Um, would we say, okay, it's less nutritious, but I'm not gonna take a supplement to make up those nutrients because and therefore I will support a human holocaust if it was the case that the nutrients are coming from that industry to make up those nutrients. Would we ever say this? Would we ever support that? Would we feel comfortable with that? No, we'd just take the supplement if we needed to.
Yeah. Yeah. So there basically is no sort of ethical case there. Like it's at that point you're appealing to some form of pleasure, to some form of convenience.
Mm-hmm.
And this is already a case that we make against people who aren't vegan. We already say that you can simply take a B12 supplement, you can simply take a zinc supplement, and you can simply put in the extra effort to be vegan, and that would be more ethical, and that you're probably obligated to do so.
Yeah. But appeal to nature, though, right? That's the thing that we hear quite a lot as vegans when we talk to carnists.
Mm.
And it does seem to come up in this kind of organic argument as well. I've especially from, I don't want to name any names, but people that I've talked to before online that say, oh, supplements are some people think that supplements are dangerous, that we shouldn't take them, and we should only get our nutrients from food. And some people think that we shouldn't drink water, we should just get it from fruit.
Mm-hmm. There are ways to slice up the data that show that vitamins are not and supplements are not healthy, and basically what it relies on is things like hyperdosing. So you have like an extreme amount of that supplement, or alternatively you have people that ignore other aspects of their life and simply feel that they are getting enough from a multivitamin, and that's not always the case either. So, like, for example, some people point to a study that came out recently on B12 consumption and increased risk of cancer in men. The issue is the men that got that increase in cancer, the way that they sliced up the data was it was men who are living an unhealthy lifestyle, who are old, and have 12,000% of your recommended daily intake of B12 every single day. So you had to be having a ton of B12. You had to be living an unhealthy lifestyle, and you had to be older, which just by default increases your risk of cancer significantly. And that's how they sort of appeal to these things being bad.
Oh wow. Okay. So
again, but some of these people aren't wrong. Like to some degree, there is an argument that like an organic system that is more natural might be more beneficial. It's just at this current state, there is not a widespread availability of those systems.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a. I don't
like if you know a organic farmer that's local to you and grows his farm without manure and is in some way respecting the environment around him, he's tilling his soil properly, he's fertilizing his soil properly, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not our problem. Our contention is with organic health on aggregate and with the usage of animal byproducts in organic farming, because those two things are not things that like principally we can argue against.
People might be concerned that if you do, I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, I take supplements myself, right? And even people that I know that aren't vegan take supplements. People have this concern that if you take supplements as a vegan, you're promoting a synthetic lifestyle. Therefore, the lifestyle is null and void because you have to supplement.
But like naturally speaking, the human lifestyle was non-agrarian, and it was simply like foraging and scavenging without cooking or food. And that's now why we're starting to see people who like have primal health arguments where it's like they don't even cook their food and they eat just raw scavenged meat. There is effectively no evidence for that being beneficial. And in fact, like the widely held view in the scientific community is that cooking confers great benefits to us by converting nutrients into more bioavailable forms, breaking down anti-nutrients, and creating like a more healthy system of consumption. Like these arguments, this is why these arguments from nature are very weak, and why instead of appealing to just naturalistic claims, what we should do always is appeal to like large random control trials and large epidemiological evidence, because that's the strongest type of evidence that we can create.
Yeah. And as humans, you know, we have the ability to rationalize these studies and know what's best for us. We don't have to scavenge, we don't have to forage. We can just drive to the supermarket and we can structure our lifestyles in a way that is more beneficial to us, because we are intelligent and we were able to do that. So why wouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Why would we have to forage? Why would we have to? I mean, if we had to forage, we should eat meat then if we have to forage, you know? And we don't have to do that. We know that we don't have to do that.
Yeah,
we don't have to rely on nature to be healthy.
Yeah, and so this is sort of the root of our argument too, right? Is it's like at this point, if we sort of reduce the system down as much as we can do practically, it's you have the choice between conventional and organic, and you're not being forced either way. You have your choice between the two, and the choice is purely preferential at this point from effectively the aggregate scientific community. And so at this point, you're preferring to eat organic for some unknowable reason, and that is at the heart of it a preference for stabbing cows.
I mean, what would you say to people that say, okay, so you present them with the evidence, okay, you're supporting the animal agriculture industry when you buy organic. When you're buying conventional, there is that ratio there. There's a certain amount of organic, a certain amount of animal agriculture that you'll be supporting. Okay, we accept this. But in some instances, there may be a case where you buy the conventional food. In that one instance, so for instance, that corn or that soy actually uses the same amount of manure as the organic industry in that one instance.
Yeah, and so this is sort of like the Puritanism like counter argument, and I buy it into it a little bit. So I buy into it as far as we could create sort of a hierarchy of crops that we should and should not eat. Like, so for example, like with this sort of argument against organic, you can also make a very strong claim against iceberg lettuce, because iceberg lettuce is effectively nutritionally devoid. It has no calories, and the amount of micronutrients in it is basically not even worth considering. But it does require a lot of manure to grow. And so what you could say is, yeah, it's wholly unethical to eat iceberg lettuce. And I would actually bite into that. I think that's a fair statement to make. The difference here is this doesn't argue against the principle of organic versus conventional, because what you would have to do is a like-like comparison. And what that means is you go compare a head of corn that was grown conventionally and a head of corn that was grown organically. And the actual moral value of like each of those is different. And the ratio at which it's different is on average around like basically it's 5 times worse or so to be eating organic versus conventional. We could go and like actually granulate this out on like a pure like each crop basis, and we can go see sort of like nitrate fixating plants, like for example, require less manure, so they're probably even like more ethical than ones that require higher levels of manure. And then things that are like more calorically dense are more ethical than other things that are like less calorically dense. But this is just like at that point it's just a descent into Puritanism. The interesting thing about just talking about conventional and organic is at its simply speaking, it's like you have a choice between A and B, and that's all that matters in this scenario. And in this case, B is less ethical. And in this specific case, the way in which it is less ethical is if you were to eat organic and just on aggregate and on average, certainly you might be able to go find some special form of organic, but just on the average consumer, if they eat organic, has to effectively justify stabbing 1 extra cow in their lifetime.
But see now, if I buy tofurkey, prove to me that I'm killing 1 extra cow. That's the argument that people throw out there. Just in the same way that, you know, if I buy eggs, prove to me that chicken. I'm killing one extra chicken or one extra, baby chick.
Yeah, and
How do you
like
put that?
so the concession there is like, yeah, the evidence that we use manure is less available than what we would like. The problem is just intuitively speaking, the effective way that this has to work is you have to fertilize your crop somehow. The way that we fertilize crops, conventionally speaking, is using synthetic fertilizers. We know that there exists a market for manure, so we know people are buying manure. Where is that manure going, do you think? It's almost certainly going into fertilization of these crops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
the demand, it comes back to the demand thing again.
So just thinking intuitively there, it's like this is almost certainly a case where, because we can't have synthetic fertilizers, we are more than likely using animal manure and blood meal and bone meal and fish meal.
And it's weird that, I mean, as vegans, we already know the argument for supply and demand, and that's the reason why, if you're an ethical vegan, I'm saying, like, if you're using that argument already, that to lessen the demand of something or decrease the supply of something, you understand that fundamentally already. It's weird to say that, okay, I don't agree that by buying tofurkey, that's going to cause a demand for cows to be stabbed. It's weird to think that in one context you think that the buying animal products would increase the demand for more animal products, and in another context you think that buying a product that causes a demand for more animal products isn't the case. So in one case you are arguing that there is a supply and demand chain, and in another that you're just sort of arguing that you can't prove that is causing more demand.
Yeah, so like to some degree, like it's just a special pleading case here where it's like somehow this reduction of the cost on like an external basis is not a derived demand specifically in organic, even though it would be in any other case, right? And like you can certainly start doing all these like other sort of appeals that are good questions to ask. Like, for example, you can appeal to what is the percentage of animal agriculture that organic contributes to, and it's if you go and do the math, it comes out that organic agriculture is basically 0.061% of animal agriculture profits. And you can say, okay, yeah, so it's an extremely small amount of animal agriculture. But then you have to contend with things like, okay, well then is just a little bit of rape okay? Yep. Like if there is one person being raped in a population of 1 million people, it's still an unjust action, even if it's not a widespread problem. And then you can have all these other arguments too about Puritanism. And those are very good questions to ask. Like we can go and ask questions about the conventional iceberg lettuce, and we can go ask questions about conventional celery. It's just on a like-to-like comparison, on aggregate, organic is worse than conventional on a moral value level.
Yep. Absolutely. And yeah, if you and again, if this is happening to humans, I don't think you'd be comfortable with saying that, okay, it's okay to do this to humans, because I want food produced that has had their shit on my food to fertilize the crops that go into the ingredients for my food.
Yeah.
And then how many, like how many more chicken deaths or cow deaths or pig deaths would you accept over and above, so the extra cash that they're making, or the extra profit that they're making, or the extra demand that they're creating, that transfers to more deaths over, if it's not per purchase, it's over the course of your lifetime. How many more animal deaths over your lifetime would you accept because you want to eat organic food, because you think there is some significant risk to your to I don't know, like cancer risk or whatever? Is it 2? Is it 3?
Yeah.
Is it even 1? Is it half a chicken? And if that was if that was one human life over the course of your lifetime, if it was a trait equalized human being, would you accept it?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's possible and practicable to reach over and choose the conventionally produced product.
Yeah, and it's just something that we have to contend with, right? You could create sort of like a normative framework where you can say like this much organic is fine if you had evidence that it was benefiting your health. I would buy into that. It's just that's why we discuss the health related effects at all, is because there is a claim there that there's a health benefit.
Yeah.
But the evidence doesn't actually point out that way. If there was a health benefit, this argument would be even more nuanced. But because of the lack of a health argument, the argument does reduce down to a preferential system where you are simply preferring the label of organic for some reason.
Exactly.
And this is sort of the issue I hear a lot from like the counter argument is they appeal to all these other sort of like subsets of organic or all these certification boards. And I would agree that those certification boards are doing things that are just, and that those ways of eating are healthy, and that those ways of eating are ethical. It's just on aggregate, as demonstrated evidentially, there is not a good case for eating organic.
Yeah. So I think we've said enough in explaining this case. I know that this is it's not a thing that has been talked about much within the vegan community, and I do feel that it's become somewhat of a meme recently. Probably a large amount of that is my fault, but yeah, I'm going to continue talking about this, even though a lot of people disagree with me, because I feel that it does need to be talked about. It does. I'm not going to stop talking about it because people don't want me to talk about it, because a lot of people think that it is going to put people off going vegan in the first place if they think that it might be too extreme or something. So if I give you an example, I mean, like this is the Vegan Society response here to like some emails that we sent them, like about the Vegan Society certification. Like, are you putting the vegan certification on products that are veganic? The answer is no. They don't stipulate. They don't control how organic food is produced, where the fertilizers are coming from, because by excluding products that include ingredients made from crops that have been grown using animal fertilizers, we significantly reduce the number of companies we are able to work with, therefore reducing our influence with non-vegan brands. This is coming from the Vegan Society, and this is kind of the contention that vegans have is that if you talk about this, then it's going to put people off from going vegan in the first place, because they think they'll be far too extreme to avoid organic food, which is more expensive than conventional food.
And so sort of like a good way to contend with that is we already deal with that argument on honey. We already deal with that argument on bivalves, and then we already deal with that argument on fish. Like those are all things that we have a relatively larger burden of proof for their pain thresholds and whether or not we're actually doing them a disservice there. And so we already have these sort of arguments with people who are not vegan. And the logical extension here is that if we're already going to hold values like that, that sort of value is equally held with organic. Like it's not a good case against a principle to say that on a practical level you might push away certain people, unless you could demonstrate to us on some level that by talking about organic at all, we are pushing an extreme amount of people away from organic.
Yeah, and there's no evidence to say that is the case.
Yeah, I do think there's evidence to say it's the case, and I think what would be important too is you can't just sort of have those conversations ad hoc. It would have to be, if we presented all of the health studies and all of the environmental studies and the ethical argument to people, how are people likely to respond? And ultimately, people who are thinking rationally are likely to respond in such a way that they say, okay, on aggregate, organic is bad. There might be some forms of organic that are good. When I go to the store, I'm going to choose to buy conventional. And in the future, I hope that there is organic farming that is sustainable and practical.
Yeah. 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 So in the future, yeah, definitely. If there is a system where we can support organic in the future, which doesn't support the animal agriculture industry, sure, I'll be all for that. Definitely.
Yeah, like we already have to deal with edge cases that people are uncomfortable with. If edge cases that people are uncomfortable with is the new standard for arguments we shouldn't present, there's a lot of things in the vegan lifestyle that all of a sudden we're not going to be arguing for.
Yeah. And I would say just because it is a taboo and you think that for whatever reason people won't go vegan because if you have to explain the principles of it and it might put them off, it's still not a good reason to not talk about it. And also, I think that ultimately, if the vegan community as a whole, if we're going to be taken seriously, if you're just brushing this under the carpet, and not willing to talk about it and be consistent with it, then how are we going to be taken seriously as a movement? You have to talk about things like this. I think it is important.
Yeah, I mean, like there are practical arguments, and there's practical arguments against what we're saying here. It's just at this point there hasn't been a demonstration of those arguments yet, and that's the sort of thing that, like, I'm very willing to be argued against on this topic. It's at this point I think that if a case could be made against what we're doing with organic, that would be highly beneficial, right? Because everything that we ought to do as vegans ought to be to help the animals. And so if there is a case against arguing against it, then that would be great. And so there are some people out there right now who are formulating what appear to be good arguments, like Foot Soldier and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so at this point, like just personally speaking, what I would declare this as is that as far as the like surface evidence is concerned, and as far as like your average consumer can reasonably be expected to delve into this issue, the conclusion is that having organic in your diet is not an ethical choice that you can make. But there might be some case on a higher level that we can sort of discuss that would allow for organic to re-enter the vegan sphere. It's just at this point, that argument has not been fully presented.
Yeah, still waiting for it.
Just all like, I don't know if you mind, but just like Foot Soldier did put out a video today, and I think he brought up some issues. So for people that are listening, if they'd like to go see the counter argument, he's in chat, and just clicking on his channel and listening to his counter arguments and waiting for, he's got a debate coming up with someone from our server called Will.
Well, yeah.
That I really am excited about that.
Me too.
I think it'll be great to get some of these counter arguments, because at this point, like, we might be entering some form of bias just and like confirmation bias on our own behalf. Maybe that's the case, or maybe we just haven't been presented with all the evidence.
Yeah.
It's just at a surface level, if your average consumer were to look at this, or if your average vegan were to look at this, what they really should come to the conclusion is that it's not practicable to justify eating conventional or organic, rather. Yeah.
Bryn, do you have any other points you want to raise? I am really busting for a wee, and I do want to like read some of the chat and stuff before I finish, but I just
so at this point, I'm working on some more complex discussions on it. At this point, all we've sort of done is on our side is present the meta-analysis. There is a deeper dive that is necessary to be done, and there are a few of us working on that. So like, I'm working on it, Will's working on it, there are a few other people that are working on it. It's just purely speaking from the highest level of evidence. As it stands, there is not a good case for eating organic for health. There is not a good case for eating organic for the environment. And if we speak purely on principle, there is not a principled case for eating organic either. The principled case would suggest that, based on our best knowledge, you shouldn't be eating the average organic product. Yeah.
Because if it was the case that that fertilizer was coming from a human holocaust industry, you wouldn't be comfortable with it. To what extent would you be comfortable with it? I don't think you'd be comfortable with it to the extent that the evidence presented to you tonight has evidence, in terms of the significance of the cancer risk, the GMO risk, the nutrition value, the environmental implications. I don't think you'd be comfortable with it.
Yeah. And so like my closing statement to everyone just be like, consider what you do when you go to the supermarket. Consider all these like niche things that we can construct. And maybe in the future, there is a good argument for some form of organic farming. It's just at this point, there just isn't that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And if anyone wants to chat on Discord, I'll be on there tonight. Bryn, you'll probably be on there tonight as well. If anyone wants to come over, the Ask Yourself Discord.
Yeah, we're more than open there. We have an organic channel where we have had a lot of counter arguments presented, and we've looked at them, and there hasn't yet been anything that is convincing. Again, most of the evidence presented so far has been surface level, because most of us that are working on this are keeping the more complex stuff sort of hidden until we have like a more academic way to approach the conversation. It's just like there is a certain level of pseudoscience that has been thrown out there right now, which is why we had this discussion tonight.
Yeah, I find this has been really useful, actually, Bryn. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I think in the next like couple weeks to coming months, this issue can be sort of hashed out on the high level that it really deserves.
Yeah.
I think that there's like we're really starting to get into like the nitty gritty of it now, and hopefully that there is a compelling case on each side, and that people will be able to be informed about their decisions in the near future.
Yeah, and until that evidence has presented, or and until we know more about it, I think it's probably best from an ethical stance to err on the side of caution and just avoid it.
Yeah, and that's basically the case that I would like to make is erring. If we err on the side of caution with things like honey, and we err on the side of caution with things like bivalves, there's a convincing case for erring on the side of caution with organic, just based on all the surface level evidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Anyways.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's really good talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on. I am gonna relieve myself now, and thank you ever so much for people that have joined tonight and tuned in. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope we continue to have this conversation. So yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Anyways, see you around.
All right, peace out. Bye. Oh.